Hi, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, providing tips on language learning, culture, and human development. And I thought a lot about how to introduce this particular topic, but I'd like to start with this. And I think the statistics are sobering in the United States and around the world. About 45,000 people die in the United States by suicide every year, and that's about a death every 12 minutes. That's approximately about 130 people a day that die by suicide, and about 800,000 people who die by suicide around the world. And our son Joshua was one of those statistics, but was so much more. And today, what I'd like to talk about is losing someone to suicide and why people matter, why teachers matter, why students matter, why friends matter. And as we talk today, I'd like to share a little bit about Josh's life, a little bit about how we as friends and neighbors and communities can support people in very difficult situations. And for any of you who are interested more in Josh's life, feel free to go to his website, joshuascottdavis.org. I certainly encourage viewer comments, thoughts. I'm going to be talking about a variety of topics that is not always easy to discuss, but I think will be really relevant to many people around the world. Well, first of all, I'd like to begin by saying that in the United States this week, this is National Suicide Prevention Week, when the goal is to raise awareness of suicide prevention, awareness, and trying to avoid the unfortunate stigma that is associated with mental illness, with suicide, which I think erects barriers that prevents us from being able to discuss these topics in a very deep and compassionate way. I think we need to be deeply involved in everything we do. And I think what often happens is that many people around the world, and I'm sure that there are places where people suffer in silence because they're not able to explain their situations and are unable to receive the compassionate support, love, care that people really need and deserve. And one of the things I think that is really difficult is that teachers, I think, find themselves on the front lines as they encounter students and colleagues who are in desperate need of emotional support. And what I'm suggesting is that while teachers are not specifically trained in the issues of mental health and mental issues, and certainly we should never overstep our boundaries to say and do things that are beyond our abilities, certainly we should be in a position to provide support where needed, to be aware of certain resources that are there. And one of the things that I think also that it's unfortunate that this stigma, and in our cultures, we sometimes lack a great deal of understanding about suicide. And there are many myths that certainly exist that surround suicide and mental health issues. So in this particular episode, what I'd like to try to do as compassionately as I can is talk a little bit about Josh's story, about mental health issues that not only affect our students, but affect our families as well. Talk a little bit about depression, talk about the challenges that we all have, try to dispel common assumptions that surround mental health and suicide. And I do so in the position and the point of view of a father, not a mental health professional. And one of the things that as I talk today, I want to make a couple of disclaimers and cautions before I begin this. And number one, suicide is a very complex issue. And sometimes overly simplistic statements about mental health and suicide really can cloud meaningful discourse and conversation about this. And I think we have a tendency to try to reconstruct why a person took their own life when really the only person that can tell us is no longer here. Number two, I think today's broadcast is not meant to be an exhaustive examination of mental health and suicide, but at least to prompt us to think about these topics a little bit more detail. The other thing is a disclaimer is that I'm speaking as a father, not a medical health professional. And I don't want to speak beyond my pay grade, and I don't want to give the appearances that I'm an authority on the subject, but pointing others to those resources. And finally, if you have a loved one that is in immediate need of care, reach out to local resources in your area. That is one way that you can get that type of help if available. So what I want to do is I want to go in and I just want to talk briefly a little bit about Josh's life. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the myths associated with mental health, and then talk about commonly asked questions. And I encourage people throughout this broadcast to be able to share your questions and comments. Any question is possible. Don't hesitate. Mona says, you are absolutely right. Parents and teachers and friends matter. Thank you, Layla. Thank you for joining yesterday's broadcast. Nazreen, hello, good morning. And so again, we're grateful to have all of you with us today to share in this particular broadcast. So I think one of the things I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about Josh so that you get to know them a little bit better than just a name. And I think this can be really helpful. First of all, to get to know Josh, we moved to Japan in 1991, and Josh was born in 1992 in Japan. We were living there. I was teaching English at the time, and his early life right from the get-go was nothing but normal. My wife was pregnant, and at 17 weeks, her water broke. And we rushed to the hospital, and the doctor indicated that probably he would not survive at that early stage in the pregnancy. And just imagine how emotional that is to be so far away from your family where you feel powerless to help. But fortunately, he was born. We were really excited. You can see the couple of pictures with Aubrey, our oldest daughter, my wife in the small little hospital. And it was a wonderful period of time. And he grew normally until about 18 months old. We noticed that when he was watching TV, he kind of tilted his head kind of toward the TV, and we knew and realized that there was something must be going on. We took him to the doctor, and we realized that actually he had a nuclear congenital cataract. So his right eye was clouded over, so he couldn't see out of that eye. But of course, he couldn't tell us. You know, he's only 18 months old. We had a surgery to try, and the goal was to try to have a surgery to replace the lens, to do procedures that would allow him to be able to see. And as you see in the picture, we patched his good eye so that his poor eye would try to strengthen, to try to build better acuity. But over time and over the years, we realized that unfortunately, he was not able to regain much sight in that eye. So literally, he was blind in one eye for the rest of his life. The interesting thing is he didn't talk a lot about it. He was pretty proud that he had, two different color eyes, and he focused on those type of things. But certainly, that was a difficult period in our lives as well. As he grew older, we lived in Japan for 8 years, and then we moved back to the States. Before we did that, I must mention that Josh went to elementary school and kindergarten in Japan. You can see a couple of pictures on sports day. We were carrying him in activity, and with his sister, Aubrey, going to school in Japan. So as he was growing up, it was relatively normal, if you could say a life is ever normal. We noticed that he was a little speech delayed and stuttered a little bit. But other than that, again, spending 8 years in Japan, then we returned back to the United States. With Josh loved computers. He wrote letters to Steve Jobs, thanking him for all of the new designs and Apple computers, Pixar movies. And in fact, in 2003, Josh joined me at the International TESOL Convention in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States, with about probably 8,000 professionals from around the world. He was really excited because he had his own name tag. He co-presented, or he assisted me in one of my presentations because he loved computers. And he did that several times as he got older. He participated with those type of events with me. And we also enjoyed the outdoors, going camping. This is one of our favorite places in the United States, actually in Utah. It's called Arches National Park. We would go camping, we would go hiking. That was really kind of part of our routines and the things that we did in life. Really exciting times. Well, that led into actually the most challenging part of his life. And when he was about 10 years old, he began to exhibit depression. And we thought it was kind of like situational depression. He then started to experience more chronic episodes. He became somewhat obsessive and compulsive in some of his behaviors, emotional distress. And it was just baffling to us because we couldn't explain the highs and lows of his moods and what he's experiencing. And I think one of the hardest parts in dealing with mental health issues is that there are no biological markers that can pinpoint exactly what is happening. It isn't like you take an X-ray and you can see a broken arm and see what is going on, and you can able to come up with a diagnosis and a prognosis and so forth. And it seems like we know so little about the 3-pound organ between our ears. It seems like we're able to send men to the moon and probes to Mars and beyond, and yet we still can't understand the workings of the human brain. And some of the things that we began to experience is that we saw over the years chronic depression, bipolar disorder, extreme anxiety. He also had high functioning autism. And just during this period, as a parent, you try just about anything to do to help your children. Again, feel free to chime in and share your thoughts on this. We have Isra coming in from the United Arab Emirates. Thank you. Mona says it must have been difficult to deal with Josh's situation, but you only know you are strong when being strong is only your choice. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. And again, thank you for sharing your comments. And again, throughout this broadcast, this is meant to share your experiences as well as sharing my own. Well, one of the challenges during this 10-year period from the time he was 10 to the time that he died, it was just, all I can express it's just emotionally catastrophic. For 10 years, he was in and out of the hospital 10 times, ongoing therapy, judicious use of medications, and then ultimately also resorting to electroconvulsive therapy. And as a parent, you're going to try just about anything to help your child. And I think this is what we tried to do. And I think one of the hardest things for me personally was worrying about what everyone else was saying around me, right? Feeling that I was projecting out, that people were feeling judgment about us and our family and so forth, because you just can't explain what is going on in the human brain. It's so hard. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about some of the myths surrounding mental health issues. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some questions. Feel free to share any questions that you might have regarding this topic. Layla comments, she says, the idea of suicide itself frightens me. That happened once in the school where I taught. I was shocked. I was choked up maybe. Since then, I've decided to be close to my pupils and to treat them like friends. I make them feel free to tell me about their problems and always try to help. And we'll talk about some of these ideas. And greetings to you, Hong Thun. And also, hello, Randall. It's late here in Philippines. I admire your courage to talk about these difficult things. And that's one of the things that I found is over the years, I found that not only students have difficulty, but teachers themselves have difficulty in talking about their own situations. So what I like to do is I like to go through a series of myths that surround mental health. Again, I'm speaking more as a parent. I am not a medical professional, but certainly I think these things bear weight in what we're discussing today. So the first thing that I'd like to share with is mental illness isn't the myth that mental illness isn't truly a medical condition or health issue. The one thing that I really want to say is that unfortunately, you cannot take a blood test to determine the causes of people suffering mentally. And mental experts are not even aware fully the exact causes. And I think what we see is that mental health issues and mental illness can deal with any situation that diminishes our capacity to cope with the ordinary demands of life. One of the things that when people say that it isn't truly a medical condition, often, saying something like, just get over it, or get a life, or just suck it up, are some of the least compassionate things that we can say, especially when we feel that this isn't really a medical condition. And that's just not the case. Number two, which I think is connected to number one, is the idea of mental illness and suicide are the result of a weak character. One of the things that I think when we come up with unfounded assumptions like this, basically they drive our inability to have compassion for people that really need it. And just simply saying that it's all in your head and just get over it really doesn't show the level of compassion, because you're right, it is in your head. And one of the things that when I think about mental health issues is sometimes, just in the same way that you wouldn't say to someone who died by heart disease or cancer that they lacked character to stay alive, you wouldn't say that type of thing to someone that died by suicide without understanding fully, as I mentioned at the beginning, the complexities of it. You wouldn't say, in the same way you wouldn't say to someone who has 2 broken legs, just get up and walk. You certainly wouldn't say that to someone who is struggling with the anxiety and chronic depression that is real. Yes, it is in their mind, but it is something that is real. And I think we need to be sensitive to that. And sometimes people think, well, all you need to do is give someone a pep talk, just some type of motivational speak, and this person will just pop out of their deep depression. And I'm not speaking about situational depression that we all go through. I'm talking about the deep chronic depression that people experience. And for many people, it's not simply a lack of willpower and desire. Telling someone who is struggling with mental illness is like trying to tell them to get out of bed with a 500-kilo emotional gorilla sitting on their chest. And you imagine how hard that must really be. And so as I think about this, I want people to keep in mind that suicide and mental illness that is associated with that is not the result of a weak character by any means. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is talking about behavior. Sometimes there's the myth that behavioral problems are simply the result of poor parenting. And that is so hard for parents that are really struggling. And I would say that certainly there are some issues of behavior that are the result of poor parenting, but there is far more at play here. As I mentioned in the beginning, the issues of mental health are far more complex than we can actually imagine and see. And so when we think about mental health issues, we're thinking about so many components that are connected together: the biological, the genetics, our personalities, our environment, and all of these kind of are woven together into the fabric of who we are. And so I think I slowly learned that I need to focus on the things that I have control of. That is all I can do. And then work with medical professionals to help figure out the rest of those ideas. The next idea, I think, which is relevant to this, is that mental illness isn't stigmatized anymore in modern society. And I would laugh at that. And I would be interested to hear from you from around the world. Is there still a stigma of mental health issues? Are you able to approach your friends just as you would be able to say, I have a broken arm? Would you be able to say, I'm struggling with depression and chronic anxiety? Do you have any fears about acknowledging that with family and friends and colleagues? I mean, which is easier, talking about a broken arm or talking about some type of disabling mental issue that you're struggling with? And actually, I think it is just so easy, because I think it's just difficult for people to imagine how complex this issue is. And I think that's what I wanted to emphasize. And again, I'm interested in hearing, to what degree is mental health issues stigmatized in your own culture and in your own area? The next idea is dealing with mental illness can't be treated successfully. Well, I think when you think about treatment and trying to understand, and Joshua over the years, he just continued to feel broken. I imagine that you go into the hospital, you come out, and then you have another episode, and then you go back into the hospital and come back out. How long will it take you to feel deeply broken and that there is no hope? And I think when we talk about different treatment models, I think these type of treatment models should be done with the help of medical professionals, consulting people that are experts on the area. I think caregivers like myself should become educated. And I think what happens is sometimes we become lost in the sea of rhetoric. When we hear so much talking about mental health issues, it's really difficult for parents. And I think as a parent, I was acting in many cases like a non-swimmer grasp hold of a life preserver. You'll hold on to anything. And I think that it's important for people to read, become educated in so many things that deal with this particular issue as well. Just to look at a couple of comments here. Nesreen says, mental health is so complicated and too many people want to simplify it. That makes it worse. Absolutely. There are many cases where people like to project out, oh, I had a friend that was struggling by suicide. And I think what happens is that sometimes we use competing sympathies. And thank you for sharing that, Nesreen. Oh, yeah, I had a family member that struggled with mental health issues or died by suicide. Therefore, I'm qualified to speak for them, or I'm qualified to speak or to share empathy with you. And we just never can fully understand and grasp the deepness of the issues. Mona says, my best friend went into depression and tried to take her own life. Luckily, she was saved. However, I lost her. She rejected me and everyone else and refused to see me. For years, I've tried to get in touch with her, but in vain. And the question is, Mona, and I would say to anyone, sometimes when there appears to be anger or whatever that emotion might be, some of these are secondary emotions. Often when someone feels angry or upset, underneath there is fear and pain and discomfort. And so sometimes people feel rejected, or people reject us and we sometimes don't understand why. And that's where that deep empathy and compassion are really needed. Now, some people will say that you're not religious enough, and so that's why you're struggling, which is so inaccurate. And I appreciate you mentioning this as well, because there are a complexity of reasons, and certainly we want to be sensitive to people. Lorena says, I admire you as a teacher. Now as a father, you're present every single day. I deeply appreciate you, what you do for all the people. All this can help many families that are struggling with this. And Layla says, absolutely, mental illness is really a taboo subject. The person cannot tell people he is suffering from depression because people will treat him like mad and crazy. Absolutely. And Mona says, you're right. I think we just need to be sensitive. And I think that idea of, and if I may, before I go on here for a minute, a few years ago, I was speaking on Josh at an international conference. There were probably 600 people in the audience. I talked a little bit about Josh and that he died by suicide. And after the session was over, a line of people formed, and a number of teachers with tears in their eyes said, I struggle too, but I just can't talk about it. I don't want to be viewed as broken by my own colleagues. And I think we just need to be so sensitive to those issues as well. The next thing is I think a really important one is it says only people who are seriously have serious problems should seek psychotherapy. And I would say no. I would say often, for example, if you have a family member, a child, a parent, sometimes we kind of send the person off to get that therapy, and we don't realize that we need that support as well. And I know in my own personal life, when Joshua was going through all of this, it was really deeply impactful for me. In many ways, I drew into a cave, an emotional cave, leaving my wife outside to really know what was going on, because I just had no idea of how to deal with the struggles that our son Josh had. And so I think that really that family members, we've been through years of family therapy, because in order to help our children, we have to be able to help ourselves and become tooled in the areas of compassion, of understanding, of validation that are so critical. So yes, it's not just those that are struggling that need it immediately, but those around them, the immediate family members, friends, also need that support as well. Well, what I'd like to do right now is talk just a little bit about some commonly asked questions that I've received over the years regarding Josh, regarding this experience. Certainly, I can't share all the details, but feel free to share any comments that you might have. Hakima says, how interesting the topics you're raising. And thank you. And again, feel free to open up, because I think if we were to unveil, I think a lot of us wear a mask of inauthenticity. In other words, we pretend that everything is going well in our lives, but we're hiding our pain and our struggle because of the worry that other people have, the worry that we have of what other people might be feeling. Is that really limits our ability to connect with other people as well. And Ube said, that's what we parents always do. We do everything for our children, no matter what, and whatever it takes, we sacrifice much for their sake. And that's absolutely important. So let me share with you now some commonly asked questions that I'm going to talk about to end today, a little bit about the things that we have done to help us cope, and how all of these questions and ideas I hope that they can help teachers, they can help families reflect on those students in our classrooms that are struggling deeply as well. So let's talk. Question number one is often people ask me, is it difficult to talk about Josh and his life and how he died? Well, I think that everyone deals with suicide, with death in general, in different ways. I think as a father, it really isn't difficult for me to talk about Josh, because I knew him. I was acquainted with his illness and his long struggle to overcome. But if you knew him, you would also know his character. I mean, I find when the people literally struggle, it amplifies their compassion. It magnifies their empathy for others. And I know that our family saw time and time again, echoed by teachers at his school, by people that knew him, that he had a tendency to reach out to others that were on the margins of society, because he also had high functioning autism. Very few people knew that. He really tried to be sensitive to the people around him. And he wasn't just reaching out to people just to be nice. And that wasn't his goal. He wasn't just, well, these people are a service project and I should be nice to people. He genuinely reached out to people in so many different ways. So no, it's not hard to talk about his life. Am I ashamed or embarrassed about his life? Absolutely not. And that might surprise people. Yes, I do not condone suicide, but I understand the reasons why people contemplate and seek out help. And I grieve just like anyone else as well. A couple of other comments that are coming. Here's a longer comment, but I think this is worth it. The people don't understand this. They think that we're just spoiled person. This is a very serious situation. Today, I'm feeling really bad. We really see gray days, literally. I'm not thinking about suicide because I have kids and they still need me. But sometimes I think it won't be here in this world for a long time. I feel something is going to happen with me. And I think this feeling of feeling alone, the desperation that we sometimes feel is real. And so thank you for sharing that. Mesa says, I think teachers should be responsible for such an issue because they should inform parents of any changes their children's children's personality, no matter how small. And those things can happen. I was grateful that yesterday when Mona talked about the project that she did with bullying. My son at school in his junior high years was bullied to extreme degrees. And I think especially we need to be aware and sensitive of all those things that really deeply impact us. The other question I often get is, where can we find information about suicide? And these would be on Josh's website. I list some examples of where you might be able to find information regarding that. Certainly, I would look to local resources if available. And I would be interested to find out to what degree can parents and teachers find that information. Teachers, my question to you is, in your own schools, do you have specific counselors that are trained in mental health issues? And in your local communities, I would certainly seek those out. Another question that often comes up is, I've heard of cases where suicide took a family off guard, but aren't there often signs that a person is contemplating suicide? Well, yes, there can be at times, but just as we've mentioned, the complexities are, the issues are so complex. With Josh, he believed in being completely honest. He believed that was part of his character. And so as we went through therapy and so forth, he was really clear. Oh, Mom and Dad, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm an 8 today. His suicidality, his emotions. And this was not to threaten us in any way. It's just, if you want me to be real, if you want me to check in with you, this is where I am. But other situations, people have absolutely no idea that something is going on. So I think it can depend in many different cases with that. Another comment, Layla says, the role of family members and friends is so important in these situations. Absolutely. And I think this is where education comes into it. And again, thinking about being caught off guard, yes, being aware of the situation, I think is extremely important. And I think one of the things where people are looking, changes in moods, certainly that can be indicative. Changing in environments, maybe isolating are certainly cases. But with Josh on his last day, he was very, very calm, which was really surprising. But at that point, we realized he had already made that decision to take his life. So certainly being aware of the issues is important, looking for signs and being acquainted with them. The other thing is, was there any bullying that led to Josh's suicide? No, not directly. The episodes of bullying happened much earlier during his junior high years. He died when he was 20, but certainly that can be reasons why students can feel deeply alone and when they might even take their own lives. So I think it's important to be aware of that. Another question was, what should I do if I feel that someone is in imminent danger? If you think someone's in imminent danger, that's when you reach out to professionals, to the emergency contact number, if that's available in your local area. Sometimes, and one of the things that we try to do as friends and neighbors is we try to rally around the person, try to help people out who are deeply struggling. But we also have to understand the boundaries and limitations of our own abilities, because what we saw is that sometimes some people who try to help and assist are caught off guard themselves with a deep emotional, you could say, whirlpool of emotions that can cause them themselves deep stress as well. So you want to be careful of that. Some other comments that come in, and Nazreen says, we have behavioral health professionals, social workers, and a school-based health center that has mental health professionals located in each of the K through 12 schools in our town. So we're talking, thank you, Nazreen, for sharing that in your particular area of the United States. That's great to hear. I'm interested in the same question. To what degree in your countries, no matter where you are, to what degree are those services available? Honthan says, as a social worker, thanks for chiming in. I have a bit of experience in working with persons who are struggling, and I understand how hard they are. I deeply sympathize with your son, Josh, and your whole family as well, Randall. Be assured my special prayers are with you. Thank you so much. Okay. Another comment, greeting from Israel. Great idea. I think acceptance is important. And another thing is too much stress impacts our mental health. Absolutely. And that's where I suggest that people, as they notice that a family member is struggling with depression, realize the boundaries and limitations of your own skills. That's where you have to consider your own mental health as well as you try to balance that out with those around you. A couple more questions. What can I do for a family member or friend who has lost someone to suicide? Number one, this can be a very uncomfortable topic, but I always suggest people step into discomfort. Be willing to reach out. Yeah, you don't know what to say. You don't know the actual words that maybe heal a heart, but not saying anything is probably the worst thing. There were times where we had family members and neighbors that would come over and say, I just have no idea what to say. And then there were other people that we had known for years, people who deeply knew of Joshua and have never said a word. And in the beginning, I was somewhat hurt because it's my son, he died. And yet I realized that sometimes we never see a compassionate model of love and concern modeled. We don't see that often in our families. And again, as teachers, this should be something that we try to model with our own students. You don't have to have the perfect words. It might come out of your mouth just in a really wrong way, but at least you make attempts. And again, one of the things that I really enjoyed as well is that in times where people would, for example, say a year after, 2 years after, they would say something like, oh, this reminds me of Josh. And I appreciated that when people, even a year, 2 years later, would say something, because usually people will rally around a family in the immediate days after a death. But the hardest part is the days, the weeks, the years that come, because everyone else has moved on, but you're still struggling emotionally with those ideas. And I think that's a really hard topic. Layla says, we are not only teachers, we also play the role of parents and therapists in our schools. We sometimes meet pupils and spend time more than their parents. And I know thank you, Layla, I've had teachers say, when students come into my class, that's the only safe place that there is for them in their lives. And so that's certainly important to be aware of. Couple of ideas. I wonder if there's anything I could have done to have prevented such a loss. There were several people that said, I could have, I should have, I might have, and then they lamented, find themselves in a period of deep mourning and guilt and grief. And for Josh, he never wanted anyone to think that someone could have or should have or might have done something. And what he would always probably say is, everyone, be better, do better. In all that we do. I think it's important. The last comment as I'm wrapping up today, and feel free to share any other questions as I'm wrapping up. Any question is fine. Please share ideas about what teachers are doing in your schools or what is not available. Anything regarding the stigma as well. The last question I want to do is, how have you managed to cope before, during, and after this period of your life? How is your family doing now? Well, let's talk just a little, if I may, a little bit about this, and I'll just show a little bit of bigger picture so you can see this. Over the years, what we've done, again, I've created the website, again, joshuascottdavis.org, where you can learn of it. Is what we decided as family is to organize, at least on a yearly basis, some type of project to remind us of the goodwill of Josh. As I mentioned earlier, when people struggle emotionally and they realize that those around them struggle as well, it creates a deep level of empathy. It magnifies your ability to see beyond the walls of your own pain and the pain of others. And so in these pictures, one of the pictures is of an Easter egg hunt. I think we from neighbors and friends, put together with candy, 1,000 Easter eggs to be used at the local food bank. There was a local food bank in the area. We collected food for the poor in our area. We helped organize it, package it, and so forth. We did that for a few years. I think that was very meaningful for family, friends, and neighbors. That was a great activity. Also, and let me just show this a little bit closer up. One of the things that Josh had, a little note on his dresser to remind him, is the saying, "We don't know another's heart." He kept that on his dresser to remind, you don't know my heart. I don't know yours. And we need to be deeply compassionate to know that the pains and struggles of people beyond us, as I mentioned earlier, all of us are hiding that pain. And sometimes when we find people that are struggling, sometimes we have to earn the right to hear their pain. And what you're seeing right here is a shirt that we designed with that same saying, "We don't know another's heart." We put together, we created these little wristbands that say on them the same saying. And then what we did is we went and participated for a couple of years in a suicide prevention walk that was it takes place around the United States. I'm sure there are many in different countries where people gathered together. These are friends and a family that are wearing this shirt to remind us of Josh, to remind of his life. And I think he wanted us to make the center of our lives the center of other people's lives as well. If I may, by ending with a couple of thoughts. For Josh, and I must give a special thanks to my wife, Shirley. Josh was he was a blessing in our lives. But Shirley was at the core. Anytime Josh was struggling, she was the deep buffer between everyone else and Josh. Deeply compassionate, loved him to the core. There was a great bond there. And we, as family, always want to remember Josh, remember his life, remember what he stood for. But also, when I think about love and compassion and so forth, as I end here, I think this is not a story to an ending, but I think we're trying to pen new beginnings. I think, and looking at Josh's life, the deep compassion, the goodness, the attempts to bear other people's emotional burdens and so forth, really has allowed us to reach out more to people, has allowed us to reach out more with more compassion. And I'm grateful that Josh was able to teach me radical compassion and empathy for others, especially those on the edges of society. And I'm extremely grateful for that. I want to thank you very much for joining this broadcast, for allowing me to share in his life. Again, if you want more information, a little bit about Josh, a little bit about resources in your community, you can look at joshuascottdavis.org. And I'm hoping some of the comments today will help us reflect on being better neighbors, better parents, better friends, better teachers, especially, as I've said before, for those that are on the margins of society, who don't fit in, who need that friendship that only we can give them in so many days. Again, and I want to thank Dusty, my sister-in-law. Good job. It's been helpful. I love you. Josh was an amazing person. And again, I want to thank you very much for joining. Feel free to share anything after the broadcast. I'll try to comment on any other comments that come in afterwards. But thank you very much for being a part of my day today. And I look forward to visiting you in another episode. All right. Goodbye.